Hey friends, I wish to report that a British tabloid has broken the discovery of life on Mars. Shock claim. Man, British tabloids really are the best. But I dug a little deeper and discovered that, well, they may have exaggerated slightly, and that these stories are all coming from one source that pretends to have some scientific authority, and that source is an obsessive person I've tangled with multiple times in the last decade. Hold on to your butts, people, because this video is just going to get weirder and weirder. This is the story of Rhawn Joseph, PhD, and his fake journals and his panspermia worship, and also his adoration of female breasts. But before we get into the truly bizarre stuff, let's investigate this specific claim. We can start by finding the scientific journal that published the paper. It's called the Journal of Astrobiology and Space Science Reviews. I had never heard of it before, which isn't an indictment in and of itself. There are an awful lot of journals out there. But when I went to their webpage, something looked familiar about it. The layout reminded me of something else. Put a pin in that. I will come back to it. Then the articles are a strange mix. The inaugural issue of the journal is supposed to come out in June, but they already have a lot of articles listed. Hey, wait a minute. Svante Arrhenius died in 1927. That's quite a coup to get a review from him. And when you click through to the articles, that you discover some of them are dead links, and others are lifted from other sources, with permission, they say. There doesn't seem to be much original work here, except maybe one thing. Evidence of Life on Mars by R. Gabriel Joseph, Regina Das, V. Rizzo, C. Cantasano, and G. Bianchiardi. Unfortunately, I've encountered a few of those authors in the past. Get another pin ready. I will return to that specific article. But who publishes this thing? That's the mystery. I tried to find out. Here's the closest thing to it, and it's a little odd. This is from the publisher's page. It says the Journal of Astrobiology and Space Science Reviews was co-founded by Carl H. Gibson, Professor of Physics, University of California, San Diego, Scripps Center for Astrophysics and Space Sciences, California. A majority of the editors collectively own a majority interest in the journal, which is free, online, open access, and devoted only to the advancement of science. Okay, free, online, open access, that's all good. But they're not telling us who the other founder was. It says it was co-founded by Carl Gibson. And put a pin in that too. But it doesn't say who the other co-founder was. That's a curious omission. So let's take a look at their press release for the Life on Mars paper. It's rather long for a press release and seems to be padded with lots of quotes from various authorities. Long quotes like this one. The most obvious source of life on Mars is Earth, explains team member Dr. R. Gabriel Joseph of Astrobiological Associates. Microbes and fungi may have been repeatedly transferred from Earth to Mars. Numerous experiments have shown that microbes embedded in rock and stone may survive ejection from Earth following meteor strikes, whereas biota in the upper atmosphere may be blown into space by solar winds. And despite NASA's best efforts, millions of microbes survive sterilization of Mars-bound spacecraft. Everything which has landed on Mars may have included microbes and fungi as part of their cargo. Likewise, these same species remain viable after long-term exposure to the radiation-intense environment of space, whereas simulation studies have shown that prokaryotes, fungi, and lichens survive in simulated Martian environments. Therefore, it can be predicted that surviving species transferred from Earth to Mars would go forth and multiply. All right, that's not crazy. Yeah, it's quite possible that this sort of thing happened. And it's quite possible that there was slight contamination of some of the Mars probes. But there's a couple of things I want to put a couple of pins in. First is that Astrobiological Associates thing. And the other is those book ads you can see on the right. Astrobiological Associates has a website. They are exploring the interaction of humanity with superincumbent non-human entities. All right. I have no idea what that means, and they don't explain. So I looked at their About page, and it's very short. It says Eric von Daniken was on the right track. He was just looking through the wrong end of the telescope. I kind of like how they misspelled telescope. All right, let's step back now. Those books on the press release. Who wrote those books? What are they about? And if you just go through them, you'll discover that they're by Deepak Chopra, some guy named Joseph Gabriel, Stuart Hameroff, some other guy named Gabriel Joseph, Roger Penrose. Oh, and I'm sorry, he's done some really interesting work, and he was a smart guy, but he's kind of gone off the deep end in recent years. And finally, there's some articles by R. Joseph. Who? You may be noticing a little theme in those author names. But wait, there's more in that press release, including this strange rant. Many scientists reject the evidence for religious reasons, believing evidence of Martian life is contrary to the Bible. Dr. Velvel Green, who supervised over 100 biologists at NASA, admitted in his article, The Rebbe and the Scientist Looking for Life on Mars, that he was warned by religious zealots that searching for life on Mars was contrary to Torah, and NASA shouldn't be doing this kind of work. According to Dr. Gil Levin, when he was discussing the Mars Viking LR experiments in a NASA meeting attended by Dr. Phil Abelson, editor of the journal Science, Abelson became angry and began shouting, "The Bible tells us there cannot be any life on other planets." Huh. That seems out of character for Dr. Abelson. But I've seen that before. That's lifted straight from a book that I will return to later. Put another pin. Okay. I'm starting to connect the dots. I know where I saw that page layout before. At a site called cosmology.com. And look, those same books are advertised on the right. I'll return to that for sale $100,000 note in a bit. Yeah, there's lots of pins going up, aren't there? The Journal of Astrobiology and Space Science Reviews is Cosmology.com, just rebranded. And further, I know that Cosmology.com is just a rebranding of the Journal of Cosmology. More on that to come. And oh look, our friend Carl Gibson is prominently featured on the main page of the Journal of Cosmology. Follow the trail, sheeple. It's all there. Everything adds up. It all leads to one central figure, one shadowy mastermind of the pseudoscientific conspiracy. It leads to Pepe Sylvia. No, not Pepe. I mean Rhawn Gabriel Joseph. It's all a scam. You see, Joseph buys up a domain name, cobbles up a website, calls it a scientific journal, and dresses it up with lots of journal-like boilerplate, and then he populates it with rehashed articles from old websites. He and his cabal of panspermia fanatics occasionally write up a new article with bold claims, send out a press release, and then bask in the warm glow of pseudoscientific attention. As soon as his reputation catches up with him, though, it's time to close up shop, open a new so-called journal, lather, rinse, repeat. He tries to hide his trail with various permutations of his name, but his ego doesn't allow him to make it too difficult. So let's look at his latest claim, that he has evidence of life on Mars. They play a shabby game with a circular set of references. So here's one, The High Probability of Life on Mars, a brief review of the evidence by Regina Sharmila Das, a mycologist. It's published in cosmology.com. That article cites another article, A High Probability of Life on Mars, the consensus of 70 experts in fungi, lichens, geomorphology, and mineralogy by Rhawn Joseph, which is also published in cosmology.com, and which is now recycled in the Journal of Astrobiology and Space Science Reviews as Evidence of Life on Mars by R. Gabriel Joseph, Regina Das, V. Rizzo, C. Cantasano, and G. Biancardi. And I do mean recycled. I've read all three, and they're repetitive, long-winded, and contain long stretches of copy-pasted text. Read one, you've read them all. This is an ethical problem. It's basically self-plagiarism and literal plagiarism. The Das article, for instance, exhibits a heavy hand of Rhawn Joseph, but he is not credited as an author. This is all stuff that will get you in very hot water with any academic institution. But Joseph has no academic affiliation other than Astrobiology Associates. A respectable journal would retract articles like this, but none of these are published in respectable journals. These are pretentious websites, nothing more, with no scientific credibility at all. So I'm going to just look at one of these articles, the main one that all these people and possibly sock puppets are citing as authoritative evidence of life on Mars. It's Joseph's 2016 article on a high probability of life on Mars, and the methodology is appalling. It's hard to believe. But here's the short summary. They made a list of 1,000 experts in fungi and lichens, and another 1,000 experts in geology. The paper describes in painful detail how they made the list, but I can simplify it. They Googled them. Then they emailed their 2,000 scientists every 12 hours over a couple of days, asking them to participate in their study, which they had to complete within 36 hours. I'd really be curious to know if any of you were spammed this way. It doesn't sound like a very productive approach. In the end, they got 40 biologists and 30 geologists to agree, which isn't a very impressive response rate. And from this, we also learn that apparently biologists are more gullible than geologists. Those who agreed were then sent 25 photos taken by Mars probes and were asked if they think the objects in the photos look like mushrooms or lichens, and to rate the probability they were actually life forms. There were no negative controls, that is, Mars photos that Joseph hadn't already judged as resembling fungi. There were no positive controls, such as photos of lichens and Earth. This is a terrible protocol. You could equally well send photos of clouds and ask, does this look like a bunny? Or how about this one, bunny or not? Then they did statistical tests. Oh, the statistical tests. This is unbelievable shit, and I have to read it to you. So Joseph writes, a Fisher's exact statistical test, Fisher, 1922, was performed by Y.A. of UCLA. Highly significant results were obtained, proving that geologists and biologists agreed there is life on Mars, as based on comparisons of the top 5 pictures chosen by biologists, P is less than 0.0008, and geologists, P is less than 0.0004. And the same is true of the top 7 photos. Biologists, P is less than 0.001, and geologists, P is less than 0.0001. Stop for a moment. He says, proving that geologists and biologists agreed there's life on Mars. No, this does not do that at all. Dozens of experts also identified these living specimens as puffballs, Basidiomycota, and mushrooms. Moreover, geologists and biologists agreed on 5 of the top 7 specimens. Typically, the alpha level is set at 0.05 or 5%. However, in this study, the findings were significant, well beneath the 0.001 level. Hence, if one were to continuously redraw a sample from the same 2 populations of 1,000 biologists with expertise in fungi, lichens, and algae, and 1,000 geologists with an expertise in geomorphology and mineralogy, we would expect to obtain the same exact results over 99.9% of the time. No, that actually is not true. Okay, he's got a kind of a rough approximation to the point of a p-value there, but no, it's not going to produce the same exact results. And also, speaking of controls, it would have been kind of nice if he'd thrown in another group of people, not biologists, not geologists, to see what they would say, because I suspect they would come to the same conclusions that these so-called experts did. The overall pattern of results confirms that fungi have colonized the red planet and that there is obvious evidence of life on Mars. This visual evidence, photographed by NASA, is presented at the conclusion of this nominating document and proves conclusive that there is life on Mars. Wow. Okay. Any statisticians in my audience may be doubled over vomiting right now if their heads haven't exploded in rage. This is an abuse of statistics and gross, intentional misrepresentation of the results. It's as if we showed people pictures of clouds that look like bunnies, did a statistical analysis of the results, and then concluded that clouds actually are sky bunnies. So here are a few of the photos they sent. This one, they say, looks like a lichen. These look like puffballs. And oh boy, this one is supposed to look like a tentacled arthropod. I agree, but I say that with some reservations because Rhawn Joseph will interpret that as confirmation of his hypothesis. But all I'm saying is, yeah, they look like that. But my agreement does not mean that they are lichen, puffballs, and arthropods. Besides the looks like argument, I have to take into account a consilience of data. That Mars is a bit arid to support the growth of mushrooms, that it's exceedingly cold there, that photos from different perspectives show different images. The arthropod isn't visible in other photos, for example, which Joseph interprets to mean it crawled back into its burrow, rather than that it is an illusion produced by irregular rocks and shadows. That Joseph makes even more extreme interpretations of rock photos. Put a pin in that. I'll be back to that later. That he has a fondness for overinterpreting data. That NASA doesn't seem to be particularly impressed by the evidence, when finding just lichen on Mars would be a revolutionary discovery that would warrant more missions. Especially when NASA concludes that many of the photos show corrosion or erosion or non-biological explanations for the phenomena. Why would NASA want to hide this information, though? Again, put a pin in that. Man, this board is just getting covered with pins and strings. Oh, well. To understand his excuses, we have to actually look at Rhawn Joseph's books. Yes, he has published a number of books. I can't put a number on it, though, because once again, he churns the same text over and over again. These are all the same books with different covers and lightly edited contents. I've read a few of them, and they are damnably repetitious and tiresome. He has very few ideas, and he takes those few and pads them outrageously and turns them into multiple articles and books, then reprints them multiple times under new titles. These, for instance, are pretty much identical. They also represent another of his obsessions, that the primary driver of human evolution has been female breasts and buttocks. No, really, he has a few books on this one subject, and I can't show you the contents because they're simply full of photographs of attractive women who are either naked or in bikinis juxtaposed with photos of the genitals of chimpanzees and estrus. If that's your thing, knock yourself out. He recycles these same photos in articles on the web, and I'll include a few links to those down below. So yeah, if you're interested in seeing shots of porn stars and shots of monkeys in the zoo, just go have fun with it. He also claims that cosmetics are all about making women's faces look as alluring as a chimpanzee's ass. So Jordan Peterson fans will be all over those links. But to bring it back to Mars, he's also written about sex on Mars and has some astonishingly good ideas about the crews of a Mars colony.
I hasten to add that since each man will be required to do prodigious service along these lines, the women will have to be selected for their sexual characteristics, which will have to be of a highly stimulating nature.
I must confess, you have an astonishingly good idea there, Doctor.
Okay, so you're wondering why not NASA would have hidden all this evidence of Martian life. And Rhawn Joseph has the answer. It was all a Jewish conspiracy. If you read his book, you'll discover that a big chunk of it is specifically about those perfidious Jews and what they were doing. So here, for instance, you see the truth was unacceptable to Jaffe because evidence of extraterrestrial life is contrary to Torah. Moreover, Jaffe and his fellow Jews felt that they were obeying God's will. It is the glory of God to conceal things. And he's going to go on and on in this theme. So he says NASA's religious zealots slander, defame, and threaten murder. No, they didn't. But if you read further, you discover more anti-Semitic nonsense. So they're complaining about the fact that Richard Hoover published evidence, he says, of extraterrestrial microfossils in the Journal of Cosmology. This is another garbage claim. He's basically got a bunch of scanning EMs of little blobs in a meteor, and therefore he interprets them all as bacteria. So anyway, Paul Hertz, yet another religious Jew, it's just infested with religious Jews, then directed NASA's wrath at the Journal of Cosmology, which he and others at NASA defamed, slandered, and libeled. Yeah, referring to the Journal of Cosmology as a joke and not a real journal, and falsely claiming Journal of Cosmology does not peer review. This isn't false at all. Journal of Cosmology is a joke, as I've shown. And here is the death threat. In fact, as reported by Science magazine in 2011, it was most likely NASA's Paul Hertz who suggested hanging Hoover in effigy in the conference center lobby for reporting evidence of terrestrial microfossils. Hanging in effigy is not a death threat. It's not exactly in good taste, I will agree with that, but you could tell that they were kind of peeved at the shoddy science that was in there. Okay, there's more. So the editor of the journal Science, Dr. Philip Abelson, yet another Jewish religious zealot, some of these scientists began evoking the Bible as proof against life on Mars. As related by Dr. Levin, Abelson became angry and began shouting, "The Bible tells us there cannot be any life on other planets." This sounds rather out of character. Philip Abelson was a longtime editor of the journal Science. I can't quite imagine him rejecting a scientific claim because the Bible didn't support it. Then it gets even weirder. So down here it says, NASA's religious war against extraterrestrial life is an affront to the Word of God. Okay, he's just been arguing that it's a bunch of religious zealots and they're opposed to the idea of life on other planets. And now what he's going to say is that the non-existence of life on other planets is an affront to the Word of God. So he's saying these religious fanatics, referring to those Jews at NASA, are not only enemies of truth, but enemies of God. What does the Torah and Bible say? In the beginning, the Spirit of God hovered over the waters, Genesis 1. What is the Spirit of God if not life? And Mars at one time had oceans of water. There are oceans beneath the frozen surface of Europa, and where there is water, there's life. You get the idea. So he's now making a religious argument for extraterrestrial life after having made a complaint about religious interpretations of the science. It's really wacky stuff. This entire chapter is just one big conspiracy theory about how Jewish scientists have been conspiring to hide the evidence of extraterrestrial life. So, NASA is full of Jewish zealots who believe the Torah says aliens don't exist, therefore there can be no Martian life. Okay, it's all a Jewish conspiracy. But this book goes even further. It's not just mushrooms on Mars. The surface of the planet is just littered with humanoid skulls. And the various Mars pros been wandering about, blithely photographing them, and only Rhawn Joseph has been perspicacious enough to notice. It's amazing how well NASA has hidden these, because the images are all publicly available on NASA's open access collection of Mars rover photos. Joseph hasn't done any original research on this subject, but has instead simply flipped through the thousands of archived images, noting which ones look like mushrooms or dead people to his eyes. All right, now this is nothing compared to what you find in his chapter on Martian skulls. Apparently, the surface of Mars is littered with skulls all over the place. So just to start here, look there. See that rock? It's got a pair of shadowy spots there. That apparently is a skull. And there's more. Looky there. I guess that's supposed to be a person standing there. So we've seen Martians now on Mars. And here are these odd-shaped rocks. And here too. More bones. All these rocks are apparently bones on the surface of Mars. Oh, look at that. Isn't that convincing? Does that look like a skull to you? Looks like a rock with a lot of holes in it to me. But okay, it's a skull. Over here, of course, now we've got this pattern. There's a backbone. There's a skull up there. See his little jaw right there? And he's apparently got his arms all sprawled out. And this, of course, is a series of vertebrae. So do you believe this? I don't believe this. This is a classic example of apophenia, and it's all over in this book. Again, don't you think if we found some skulls on Mars, NASA would have had the rovers zoom in on them, get close-ups, push them around, take lots of pictures, except, of course, for the Jewish conspiracy that says they can't do that. And this stuff just disappears once you look at it from a different perspective. So the eye easily detects or pretends to detect patterns in the visual world, including familiar things like, okay, there's a face with eyes in it. We see this all the time. This is the best evidence he's got. And it's just a matter of going through the Mars rover collection of photographs and misinterpreting everything he sees. So I mentioned earlier that cosmology.com is for sale. And this is a little bit personal because I think it's my fault. So when cosmology.com and Journal of Cosmology first appeared on the scene about 2009, I made a number of complaints about them and rebutted many of their arguments. And I've been doing that over the years because they're constantly coming up with absurd things like diatoms on meteors. You may have heard about this one from Phil Plait. Or that squid came from outer space. Or all kinds of off-the-wall stuff. And all of it's garbage. And I was constantly correcting them and putting up blog posts that argued about it. And I think I made an enemy forever of Rhawn Joseph. So shortly after I made a number of these complaints, he put the site up for sale for $100,000. And you might be saying to yourself, well, what's the evidence that I have anything to do with it? This page no longer exists, by the way. I guess the embarrassment was too great and he eventually removed it. But at the time when it came up, if we just scroll down a little bit here, look at there. It's in honor of P.Z. Myers. And furthermore, let's go down a little further. He's got photos. Yeah. So P.Z. Myers celebrating there. He's a frothing at the mouth lunatic who raves about subjects he knows nothing about. Oh man, he was bitter. He's also a bit of a misogynist, and he's into fat shaming because there he is photoshopping my face onto the bodies of obese women. as if that is a terrible, terrible crime. Yeah, it goes on and on. P.Z. Myers, also known as Lard-Ass Myers, relaxing at home. This special edition is in honor of P.Z. Myers, professional crackpot, hate-monger, and ignorant lard-ass. Okay. As you can see, P.Z. Myers has made quite an impression on the folks at cosmology.com, to the point where they folded shop and put the place up for sale. Yeah, it goes on. We'll just scroll through a little bit further. Okay. Yeah. Jokes. Yeah, I worked as a Pillsbury doughboy. My personal motto is hate, hate, and more hate. Yeah. My favorite book is the one I haven't finished coloring yet. You get the idea. Yeah, and his number one source book is the Bible, Genesis. Yes, you just gotta love this guy. He embraces religious viewpoints right out of the Bible and claims to be an atheist. Wink, wink. He is a creation scientist in drag. Okay, well, anyway, you can get the idea here. I have earned myself the enmity of Rhawn Joseph. I'd really like to meet the guy sometime and talk with him just to find out what's going on. Oh, yeah. You see, I'm fat. I'm a woman. I eat too much. Yeah, I have the IQ of a frog. But what can you say about a guy who thinks this is witty criticism to Photoshop my face onto things? Anyway, I think that's enough. You get the idea. So Rhawn Joseph is a major crackpot. He's got some issues. And his cosmology.com went out of business, basically. He's still trying to sell it. It has not sold. So now he's opened up a new site, started a brand new so-called science journal. How absurd. Okay, I think that was all. Yeah, that's enough. Okay, we're done. That's enough, Rhawn Joseph.